Welcome, everyone, as we get ready to dive fin too deep into the Senior Bowl today. Me and Neal will give our top 10 standouts this week at the Senior Bowl who we think fit the needs of the Miami Dolphins. On top of that, are the breadcrumbs? Is the evidence? Is it all leading to Brandon Staley coming down right now between the Miami Dolphins and the Los Angeles Rams? We will talk about that. Also, a guy I mentioned last week on my top defensive coordinator candidates, I called him a potential long shot. Well, he has been gained an interview, and could the Shula lineage continue on for the Miami Dolphins? Man, we got a ton to talk about, a ton to cover. Smash the like button. Subscribe if you're new. You already know what time it is. Let's get into it, people.
Loses the football. Touchdown! Got it! You have got to be kidding me. Jalen Waddle has a Dolphin touchdown. And he will score! Field down the near side, man open. Touchdown! The run from Tua Tagovailoa. Touchdown! He's going deep. He's got it over the touchdown again. Beautiful day to be a Dolphins fan. Let's go!
You're listening to Fin Too Deep.
Tua back to throw. Blitz coming. They get to him. No, he takes off running. And he's in. Touchdown, Miami.
With the sixth pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Miami Dolphins select Jalen Waddle.
Giving you unfiltered, informed, and controversial takes on the Miami Dolphins and the NFL Draft. Here's Reason and Neal.
What is good, Fin Nation? What's good? It's your boy Reason. We're back here for another one as we get ready to dive fin too deep. And hey, free agency hasn't even started, but it's already draft season. And we're going to get into it today with the Senior Bowl. We attacked the exercise two different ways. We'll talk about that when we get there. But we're going to go over our top standouts who fit what the Miami Dolphins currently need. We are going to talk about Brandon Staley. We're going to talk about Chris Shula. Sporting News handed out comeback player of the year and offensive player of the year. We'll talk about all that. So, man, we got a ton to cover, Neal. First of all, man, hi, how you doing? Coming off that panel show earlier this week, and as you know, hey, Mike Vrabel didn't get a job. Bill Belichick didn't get a job as the Washington Commanders have hired Dan Quinn. My God, everything's awry in the NFL right now.
Oh man, if you're a Commanders fan, you got to feel that that's a lackluster hire, man. That's got to be a tough blow. But now feeling good. Put a bow on the Dolphin season. Talked it out, and like you said, it's full on to draft mode. I've been in draft mode for a little bit here, more so than the last couple of years because we haven't had a first round pick. So I reduced the amount of work that I put in over the last 2 years, but I've done cut ups on over 100 players already this year, this cycle, and I'm fully back in, man. So really loving it, loving the draft. I love when the Senior Bowl starts. I feel like that's the kickoff to the real off season. Before we know it, I mean, look, we're only a month and a half away from the NFL league year starting, free agency. So there's going to be a flurry, fast and furious of moves here where the Dolphins got to get cap compliant. There's franchise tags, use them or not. There's deals for quarterbacks. It's not going to be a quiet 45 days for Dolphin fans, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the defensive coordinator search alone, it's not going to be quiet based on that. Knight says, I think Jackson Powers Johnson just earned a first-round pick. I would not disagree with you. He has separated himself from the pack. If Zach Frazier could have been out there, he probably could have solidified him as the unquestioned number 2 or vying. But, he was a little injured. He made both of our lists in different capacities today, did Zach Frazier, even though he really didn't do much. He took some snaps on day one, but a lot of more sideline work. But yeah, man, I feel like, honestly, it feels like the center specifically, Neal, it's top heavy. If you're not getting one of those top three, you're taking a guy like, you're taking guys who, like, did you see they're using Puny at center this week?
Kansas, yep.
Yeah. Who else there was someone else that they even Christian Haynes, who made my list, he took some center reps. They wanted to see what he did at center this week. What are your thoughts on the depth of the center position? Because that's one thing that I've kind of been like, once you get past those top three, you're talking about guys like Bryce Foster, Matthew Lee. I know Andrew Ram, he from Oklahoma, he apparently had a pretty good week this week. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, like with Jackson Powers Johnson, I was surprised he declared, because Oregon does a great job of keeping players to return. They're as good as any team in the country at doing so. So when he declared, especially, they had a hell of a transfer portal offseason, adding talent to their team. Added a good quarterback to the mix over there. So I was surprised to see him go. And you're going to get a lot of Creed Humphrey comparisons because he's that country strong guy. Then there's Cedric Van Pran, who I like a lot too, who's that experienced guy, reliable, great technician. You can rely on that guy being out there and handling people. He reminds me a little bit of Rodney Hudson, actually, coming out of Florida State, who had he had a borderline Hall of Fame career. And then there's Zach Frazier, a guy that, we haven't got to see much of the Senior Bowl, but I know that NFL scouts love him and view him as a day one starter. And it's going to be really interesting, because I do think the Dolphins view that they have three starters right now, and that's Eichenberg, Austin Jackson, and Teron Armstead. And the thing about Eichenberg is, depending on what they do, I think that will determine where he goes. Like, I know you and I both I want that Robert Hunt contract more than any contract, free agent.
I've been saying it since last offseason, right, Neal? When they couldn't get Wilkins, what was I saying, Neal? Pivot to Robert Hunt, get him done.
Well, and if you get Robert Hunt done, you have four starters solidified. And I feel like adding a guy like Jackson Powers Johnson can really solidify that. And if you want Eichenberg to play center, get a guy like Troy Fontenot, and you could really develop.
If we pass on Jackson Powers Johnson or Zach Frazier or Cedric Van Pran because they think Liam Eichenberg is a legitimate starting option at center, we got issues.
Yeah, I'd rather see Eichenberg at left guard, to be honest, and knowing he'll be.
Well, he says he's more comfortable at right guard. Even he says he's more comfortable at right. He's depth. I don't see him as a starter.
I hope so. I think Miami does view him as a starter, and we'll see. And they might get a guy on the cheap like Isaiah Wynn, who played well for them, to kind of come in here and compete. They need depth this year. Robert Jones will probably be a restricted free agent that gets tendered. I could totally see them trying to get Kendall Lamb back on a 1-year deal. I think there's going to lot, but when you look at it, Andrew Ram from Oklahoma is a guy that I've had on my radar for 2 years.
Yeah,
he's a good player, but you look after that, there's a guy from NC State, Dylan McMahon, that I think is a good guy in the middle rounds. I'm just looking at a list that I have over here. My interior, like it's Bo Limmer is a guy from Arkansas.
That I think decent week.
Yeah, he's a guy that if and
he got put on his ass on a couple reps. I don't know if you saw them where he got dominated.
Well, we're going to talk about our list, and there's some defensive tackles that are down there, though, man, that are a problem. Like
we both like one specifically who's been a disruptor all week, man.
Right? Yeah. I mean, and I look at the list, like there's good depth here. I have 17 to 18 players that I view as NFL quality, either starters or quality depth pieces. So, and that's, I've ranked 50. So a guy that I think to keep an eye on when you just talk about the interior, not center, who's coming off a big injury though, is Zach Zinter from Michigan, man, because I think he's a borderline first-round talent that will fall because of injury. But yeah, man, I want the Dolphins to get that traditional side. Right? Like I'm on record. The first mock I did, I wanted Troy Fontenot, and I still would want him because I love the ability that he has to kick out to play left tackle in an injury situation, Teron Armstead. But
yeah,
I'm right. 1A and then 1B for me is Jackson Powers Johnson, because I just know how important to find that center is. And as much as I like Connor Williams, I have a hard time spending that type of money on a guy that's coming off the injuries that he's coming off of, right?
So
And
I'm guessing
that's
Jackson
where I am.
Powers. I'm guessing Jackson Powers Johnson and Troy Fontenot are your top interior guys. Where's Cooper Beebe? Is he right behind them?
Yeah, no, he's in my number 5. So I am order. My guys are Fontenot from Washington, Jackson Powers Johnson.
Oh, you do interior, you're not separating.
I do interior, but I'm going to separate them out because
Yeah.
that was something that actually Omar Kelly suggested last year.
Yeah.
And
That's what I do too. Yeah.
It's actually starting to come to be.
The problem is Jackson Powers Johnson can be ranked on both lists.
And that's where it gets hard, man. But then my third actually is Graham Barton for Duke, because I love his interior versatility.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then I got Cedric Van Pran. Then I have Cooper Bebe. Then I have Zach Zinter, Zach Frazier, Mahogany, Javion Cohen, and then Christian Haynes is my 10 overall. So, a lot of those guys, I think all 10 of those guys are guys that you can view as day one starters. And then after that, you're starting to get into the depth world.
Yeah, I agree with the Graham Barton from Duke too. The fact you kind of like Troy Fontenot, right? He can play inside out.
I love it.
Right?
Yeah, I think he can play all 5 positions actually, at a good level. And he's a big, strong, smart football player, good football IQ, just really comfortable with a guy like him. But for me, in the first round, the only 2 offensive linemen I would take are for the interior are Jackson Powers Johnson.
I agree with that.
That's it. Like, even as much as I like Cedric Van Pran, I think that he's a second round guy. The perfect scenario for the Dolphins, who need draft picks, Reason, is to find that team that wants to move up for Michael Penix or wants to move up for a quarterback, J.J. McCarthy, and say, you know what, we'll move 7 or 8 spots back for a second or third round pick.
Give us a day 2 pick to go with it.
We need picks, because the one thing, my overall summary of this draft is that the Dolphins need to create more draft picks.
Yeah, because we only have first 2 rounds, and then we don't pick till the 5th.
Yeah, and that's where the trade back's one option, and then the other option, which I think is going to be very difficult to execute, is a tag and trade.
Wilkins.
Yeah, because you're not going to get I've seen people
leverage.
Like, and people are like, you get a first round pick for Wilkins. You're not going to, because of the contract. You might be able to get a pick after 50 in the second round, a late round 2, early round 3. And the reality, the way I look at it, is if you are going to lose Wilkins, the compensatory pick is going to be like 100, right? So whatever you can do to put yourself in a better position, especially when your window is really right now, because there are starting caliber linebackers, defensive tackles that will be in round 3. I like to see
the guys we're going to talk about today are going to be there on day 2, probably, right?
I like to see Miami acquire 2 more picks in the second to third round, by any means necessary, even if that means trading maybe future.
Yeah, if you can get a second and 4th, or second and 5th, or third and a 4th, or third and a 5th, for Wilkins, that's a win.
You do it all day long.
If you gave me a second and a 4th, I would run to the podium and say, "Here you go, Christian."
A second round pick would be great value, considering, we've talked about it on the thing. I've heard that he's going to get to test the market. And there are teams, and I know 2 teams in particular, the Vikings and Bears, that will pay him $24 to $25 million per season.
Good, let him.
Yeah, and I think that you don't want to lose good football players, but there's also.
But you also don't want to be taken to the. You don't also want to overpay good players.
Right. You got to be careful, and interior defensive line is one of the positions that should be easier for good GMs to find.
Well, and again, if we are keeping this, like, let's say we go with Staley, or let's say Evero shakes loose. If we are keeping what we are building defensively intact, I've been saying this since last offseason. Edge players, second level players, and secondary players get paid before interior guys in this scheme. That's why Sealer at his tag was such a fit. And again, you're looking across the room. Listen, I'm going to tell you this right now. You're looking across the room at Sealer and his production. Does Wilkins really have all the leverage? Because they're getting similar production for half the cost. They're not going to give you Quinnen Williams money when they're getting that production from Sealer. You don't have all the leverage. You're not the only interior option. Now, we may only have Sealer and Pilley under contract, and I get that, but they could think of the players you could supplement for the cost of $24 million. You could re-sign Hunt for half that, and then you could turn around and get two more good quality players.
Reason, you could get Robert Hunt, Derrick Henry, and still have $5 million cash to spend.
It's true. It's true.
I hate to say it like that, and that $5 million could be saying, you know what, we're going to keep Deshaun Elliott and Braxton Berrios. Like, and when you
I don't know about the second one, and this is coming from Berrios guy, but the first one, you're onto something with
here's
keeping
why
Deshaun Elliott.
Dude, I read Berrios is only going to get 1.7 on the open market, man, for the punt returning that he does to be a fifth receiver. I don't hate it, but either way, I'm just saying.
Okay, I don't hate it, but Jesus, we need a lot. I thought that guy was going to have a career year. We need more, bro.
But like that's for me. It's like I can honestly sit there here and say that I think Christian Wilkins is one of my 5 favorite players in football. But as much as I love him, I love the Miami Dolphins more. And I know that signing him is going to cost us Jalen Waddle. Like I know that. And that's where like
or Javon Holland, who doesn't have a 5th-year option.
Well, and I know that people are going to come out here and tell me I don't know the salary cap, which I do, and tell me that like you could keep pushing money down the hill. Eventually, you hit the bottom of that hill,
and you better have been drafting real good along the way down the hill, or you're effed.
And I'll be honest, like this isn't a popular thing, but we have this window. Like I want to keep Javon Holland, I want to keep Jalen Waddle. I want to keep Jalen Phillips. Like those are the core guys that I want to build this team around in life after Tyreek Hill. So like for me, like that is where I'm thinking. I'm thinking, wow, home run draft pick Christian Wilkins. We love you, buddy. You were amazing. You backed it up. You talked the talk, and this year you even backed it up even more than you ever have in your career. You've earned every penny that you're going to go get in the open market. Unfortunately, the Miami Dolphins are $52 million over the cap right now, and I did an exercise on my timeline where I showed us get to $40 million pretty easy to go spend.
Yeah, I went over it yesterday on the show.
And what I'm saying about that, though, is my $40 million, I'm not investing 3/4 of that in one football player. That's just not what I want to do with it. The guy that I want is Robert Hunt because I'm operating with this mindset this year. Tua's getting his new deal. Tua plays his best football when he's not facing pressure constantly, like most quarterbacks, right? Build a freaking wall in front of him and let Tua cook and do what he does best. Don't invest in an interior defensive tackle. The defense is going to have a kind of a new look and feel depending on who they hire anyway. If the salary cap was unlimited and this was baseball, the Dolphins would be the biggest fools in the world for letting Christian Wilkins test the market. But this isn't. And there's a cap. And people could say it's not real or it's real. It's real. You can manipulate around it. It's like using credit cards to pay your groceries. You go spend $100 on groceries. If you don't pay those bills, that $100 is going to be $150, right? Like that is how it operates. So the Dolphins are being wise. I do think Christian Wilkins, I posted this yesterday, has played his last down in Miami. Let's use him as a chip to allow us to go get a Cedric Van Pran, right? Go get a player of that caliber because you can't just let him walk out the door for nothing. Now, you know, if I'm a team, like I would leverage what I've heard, right? If the Bears and Vikings are the 2 teams that I've heard that won them, they're in the same division, right? The Bears have more cap space than the Vikings. The Vikings will get creative on how they sign them. My first call would be to Minnesota and say, hey, Minnesota, you want Wilkins? Because if not, the Bears are going to sign him in free agency. You pony up that second-round pick, which is not a bad second-round pick. It's in the top half of it, and he's yours. So I think that's would be good business. I'm making it sound probably a little too easy because the money Wilkins is going to get is going to be big. But look, Wilkins is a top 5 free agent on most people's boards. There's teams that have more cap space than other teams.
Well, and you got to think about this. Would you get a better, more NFL ready pick in the second round than Christian Wilkins right now?
No, for the Vikings, if you're looking at defensive tackles in round 2, you already know that Jerzon Newton and Byron Murphy and probably a guy that we're going to talk about in a little bit are going to be gone at that point.
Yeah,
you're going to the 5th,
Michael
6th,
Hall and those kind of guys,
right? And they're not bad players, but
Darius Robinson and stuff like that. Yeah,
I'm telling you get a top 7 defensive tackle in Christian.
Yeah,
right. Not a top 7 in that draft class. You know what I mean? So it's a good move, and I'm really excited to see what Chris Grier does in the next 45 days because I think it's going to shape the next 3 years of being a Dolphins fan.
Yeah. All right, so let's start off. Before we get into our top performers, one thing I do want to talk about here, that's one of the main things here on, our main title basically for today. I want to show people this because this news broke, and So, Boston College coach Jeff Hafley is expected to become the new defensive coordinator of the Green Bay Packers. Hafley has brought BC to bowl eligibility in 3 of his 4 years. So, why does that matter, Neil? Because who did he interview Brandon Staley with? LaFleur, McDaniel, and McVay. One is off the board. Does this feel like it's coming down to a Rams or Dolphins decision for Brandon Staley to you, even though we are doing our due diligence? The reason why, we'll get into the candidate that they'll be interviewing on Friday, and they're announcing interviews on Friday, like Slowick and stuff too. I believe it's Friday. It's because they know he's a guy like Staley's doing his due diligence. It goes back to a show I had a couple of days ago where I asked, is Brandon Staley the preferred choice of Mike McDaniel when you start doing the research? And, it's the same thing. It kind of feels like a poor man's Fangio all over again, where all the fans, the same crew of cast of characters I just named they wanted Fangio. All of them wanted Fangio, said he's the hardest to prepare for. Then you see McDaniel talk about Staley at QB Collective, saying Staley, he said, Brandon makes you invent things left and right to try and counter him. It just feels like it's of the same lineage. It's the defense all those minds prefer. And we know this. The top protege under Fangio has been and still is Brandon Staley. Now, other guys have come from that. Raheem Morris came after Staley, and, D'Amico Ryans, et cetera, have come from that as well, from that ran iterations of that defense. So what are your thoughts on this? Because the breadcrumbs with them moving on so quickly, Green Bay, they obviously know Staley wasn't an option.
Right.
So we haven't announced anything. We continue through our process. The Rams are continuing through their process. Does this tell you that it might be a 2-horse race for Brandon Staley right now?
Yeah, and since we had this opening, I was on record as saying I thought Brandon Staley was going to get the job, and I still think that's going to be the guy when the kind of the dust settles that is going to be named the Dolphins coordinator. I think he has a great relationship with both the coaches he's in the running for. I just think the Dolphins are probably an opportunity that he's going to want to pounce on. And I think good for the Miami Dolphins for handling their defensive coordinator search the way they have. They've turned over a lot of rocks, and Ricky Bobby said, if you're not first, you're last. Well, I think in this scenario, the Dolphins have actually proved that wrong, because you're seeing a lot of positions fill up. Now the Dolphins are in that position of power where they can go out there and really examine the candidate pool. Like, look, 32 head coach jobs are all filled at this point, right? And Mike Vrabel wasn't one of them. And I'm on record saying that would be my number one hire. Can the Dolphins convince him to come in for an interview? Like, it will be really interesting to see what happens here. But taking out all that stuff, Brandon Staley to me just seems like the next guy that's going to be in. But I do believe, and we talked about this on our roundtable, that Anthony Weaver is a guy that might really be.
That's what I was going to get into. They have named their defensive coordinator in Baltimore, and it's not Anthony Weaver, Neil.
Well, yeah, and the one thing I will say about that, and from what
I'm not saying it is a shot. I'm saying he's available. We all thought he would get the job. You know what I mean?
But what I'll say that I know, and I got to be careful how I say it. So I don't think the Ravens just named the guy they wanted to replace Mike McDaniel. I think that guy went to Tennessee. Denard Wilkins, who I think the Ravens.
That defensive line assistant, the coach, defensive
line coach. DB coach.
Yeah.
Yep. I think he was their first choice. And that's why they quickly named Zach Orr the defensive coordinator today, because they didn't want him to leave because I think he would be a potential for another team. I would say that Anthony Weaver, this does not mean that he's not a good coach, but the Baltimore Ravens viewed him third in that pecking order. And that's something to take into consideration. I'm just saying, like, that doesn't mean he's a bad coach. He's up on the top of my list, believe it or not, because I really, really think that he could bring that youthful energy to our staff. But for me, it just makes too much sense for a guy with experience like Brandon Staley. Like, we see Brandon Staley's failures as a head coach. When I say we, just overall, a lot of people see that, and they kind of run with that as like he's a bad football coach. But he got in that position because he was a great defensive coordinator. And like I said this when we had that that show right after the thing. He's the Josh McDaniels on the defense side of the ball for me. A guy that just doesn't have the mustard to cut it as a head coach, but he's a damn good coordinator, right? That's why Bill Belichick takes Josh McDaniels wherever, he goes. And whenever he doesn't have a job that works out, he brings him back as his own coordinator. Brandon Staley, he fits the culture of what we're doing. I like Leslie Frazier a lot. But doesn't that feel like it's like a similar to a Vic Fangio type of move? Like,
it feels like more of a Greer move actually, because he's wanted him in the building for a while.
Right, and he's a hell of a coach. But the good news, I think, is that the Dolphins are really exploring some top-notch candidates.
Yeah,
Where
they're looking under every stone, right?
Right.
They're turning over every stone.
Yeah, I think they're doing a really good job, and I think it gets wrapped up in the next 3 to 5 business days. I think after tomorrow's meetings, barring some unforeseen meeting like Rabel that could come out of nowhere, I think that this is probably going to be the Dolphins' final set of interviews, and that they're going to try to wrap up a decision. It's going to be Brandon Staley. I think that's our next defensive coordinator.
Before we get into our top performers too today, another thing that came out today was from Tom Pelissero. The Dolphins are interviewing Chris Shula, the grandson of legendary coach Don Shula, for their defensive coordinator job today, per source. Chris Shula has spent 7 seasons as an assistant with the Rams, most recently as the pass rush coordinator and linebackers coach. Obviously, he is the grandson of the Don. And when I did my top 11 coordinator candidates, he was number 11. I put him in as my quiet little dark horse that'll get an interview. And I mean, some people, I guess he just wasn't on some people's radar. And here you go. He's interviewing now. I think he's a long shot. He's been, he's there for when they won the Super Bowl. So I think it's too early on where he's at. I think there's other candidates that are probably much more qualified for this job than him. But I think this is a guy who's starting to get his feet wet in the cycles. And in the next couple of years, he's probably going to land a job.
Yeah, this comes from a guy that when the news broke that Don Shula passed away, I had to leave work because I was so discombobulated and go home to get my shit together because I have so much love and respect for Don Shula. Guy's got the best last name maybe in the coaching circles that ever existed, but he's not ready to be the defensive coordinator of a team that's ready to fight for a postseason and hopefully win postseason games. So as much as I respect the Shula family and he might turn into be a hell of a coach one day, he's not ready right now. Now, maybe this is a case where if we can find a liking to him and, we hire, a Brandon Staley, maybe he's got to fit somewhere on this coaching staff. That wouldn't be a bad thing. Sometimes when you do these interviews, you have candidates that aren't hired, and there's only a certain amount of jobs in the supply and demand of a defensive coordinator in football. You build the right relationships. Maybe it's something where you could say, hey, look, we're hiring this guy, but we like you. Why don't you come join our staff?
Yeah.
And I think that could be one of those scenarios, but it's a hard no for me as the head defensive coordinator here. It might sell you a couple tickets, but I don't think it's going to win you any big-time games.
Shout out to Jim Rios-Lacey for becoming a YouTube member. Also, shout out to Franklin and Son for becoming YouTube member as well. All right, so here's the deal. We're going to go over our top performers, and we also have highlights. Some of these players. I put together some highlights from their one versus one reps over the first couple days. So do you think we should bring should I full screen the list? And as we're talking about players, should I play the highlights maybe?
Yeah, you can get my weatherman jacket off the camera. I look like a weatherman here in this jacket. I can feel it. It's 39 and cloudy right now.
So let's you know what then all right. So
How awesome is the Senior Bowl week? For me, it's amazing. I freaking love it.
It's awesome. I love it too. All right, so let's start with this then. Here are our you know what? Let's do it this way. I like it. We'll go that way a little bit better.
Right there we go.
Here. All right, we'll go like that, and then I'm gonna put the video in there as well.
Okay.
So we both have the same guy at the top. Jackson Powers Johnson, center, Oregon. I guess that's the perfect segue while we're talking about him to play maybe his highlights from today. I don't know. I'll roll his highlights while we're talking here. But I mean, he was obviously easily one of the most dominant guys this week. For me, I'll let you go, but I'm just gonna get out what I gotta say here. I thought this week he showed great balance, good ability in open space, which we already knew. His power was on full display. Showed patience and quick feet when he was dealing with, more of those speed rushers instead of power rushers. He maybe had one bad rep all week, and he stopped practicing today because he had nothing left to prove. Again, built perfectly for this run zone scheme, 6'3", 334 pounds. 32 and 1/8 inch arms, 79-inch wingspan. He was a stud this week, man. He was good this week. So I don't know what you thought. You got him 1-2.
Yeah, I think he was probably one of the top 3 players that probably were there at all. He has an amazing ability to really set an anchor. I love his hand usage. He doesn't get grabby. He can handle power and he can handle speed. His feet are tremendous for a center and his size. He reminds me actually of a little bit more athletic Creed Humphrey, where I think he and he, I love Creed Humphrey, and I know you did, and we both wanted him in the draft where he went. This guy seems like exactly what the Miami Dolphins need. Like, you could put your top 100 draft boards out there, but I have a different draft board for the Miami Dolphins than I have ranking my prospects. And this dude is just exactly what we've needed for a long time. He's that pure, true center that you can, put in the middle of this offense. And no team franchise knows centers. We had Dwight Stevenson. We've had Mike Pouncey. We've had these guys, and they've all panned out for us. I just think Jackson Powers, that's a slam dunk pick for me right now. If he's on the board and we pass on him, and it's not for me personally, Troy Fountain, who I love in the interior, is my number 1 ranked offensive lineman in the interior in the whole draft. I would be really upset about it because I just feel like he is such an ideal fit, especially in the zone blocking scheme that we run. I mean, man, and we play in a division that has Quinn and Williams. Like, that matters when you want to draft a pure center. Jackson Powers Johnson, to me, is an A+ draft pick. I don't, and those who think that his performance is going to get him out of the range for the Dolphins, you typically don't see centers go that high. Like, Linderbaum was picked after where the Dolphins are picking. Like, I think he'll be on the board where the Dolphins pick. There's a lot of time between now and the draft, but God, man, what a hell of a football player. What a performance. And this defensive tackle class he's going up against at that Senior Bowl is really, really good.
Yeah, he's a beast. And I want to show everyone, listen, we got different orders here because we kind of approached it differently.
Right.
Neal approached it from basically a ranking based on the guys who are there and how they fit what we need. I ranked it on how these guys have performed this week in Mobile. That's how I've ranked mine. His are ranked on his rankings where they fit on the board. Mine are based on how these guys. That's why, he's got Zach Frazier at number 4. I've got Zach Frazier as an honorable mention because he didn't really do much this week, right? So that's why you'll see those differences. So I just want to explain to people why they're seeing the difference, right here. Because, bro, I was shocked that I didn't. I'm shocked I didn't see him on your list, bro. I gotta, he's been a beast this week. Has Fuega, and I got some. Hey, we got some reps for him, don't we? So he's been a complete beast this week. He dominated Adisa Isaac, one of the top edges this week in Mobile. No issue. He's flashed his anchor, his ability to take on power rushers all week. I just seen clean footwork. I've seen really good patience and, no problem mirroring the quicker rushers. I think he's a top 3 tackle in his draft, 6'6", 335 pounds. If he's on the board and you're looking for the heir apparent to Teron Armstead, look no further. but he'll be gone. He'll be gone.
What you said is the reason I don't have him on my list. I just didn't view that he'd be there with the Dolphins. I know one division rival actually has him as the number one offensive tackle on the board over Fashanu from Penn State and Joe Alt from Notre Dame. So I think he's a hell of a football player. I don't think we have any shot at him. But I mean, dude, he could play. He's probably better suited on the right side, but I think he can make that transition to the left side if needed as well.
You have a guy that I have at number 7. And so again, mine's based off need, right? I think we got higher needs up top than defensive tackle, but based on how this might go. You've got him number 2, absolute disruptor, Devondre Sweat. Go off. Let me know what you think of him, and then I guess I'll add my thoughts in after you, and I got some highlights of him too.
Yeah, he gives me a little bit of Vince Wilfork vibes. He's 306 pounds, but he moves really well. He moves like me getting my third beer of the night from the fridge. I mean, he's quick on his feet. He's got power, man. He has the ability to really just control and dominate the line of scrimmage. At the point of attack, man, I mean, you don't have many offensive linemen that can really control that type of power and speed. I think he's actually a tremendous fit in what we've needed for quite a long time. He's kind of what I think I was hoping Raekwon Davis would have been in this defense. That true nose who can control the line of scrimmage, eat up blocks so your linebackers have more mobility in those A and B gaps. And I just think that Devondre Sweat, I don't know if I would use a first round on him where the Dolphins are, but he's a guy that I think is going to get selected in the top of the second round. And the Dolphins are going to be down Wilkins and Raekwon Davis more than likely. They're going to need to add the defensive tackle to this roster, whether it's free agency or the draft. And he'd be at the top of my list. And he's just another guy that I love players that make everyone around them better. And you saw the emergence of his teammate Byron Murphy II this year because Devondre Sweat did a lot of that dirty work. But that's just it's unteachable size and power.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. He's just so strong, man. With me, when I looked at him, absolute pocket disruptor.
Right.
A guy who I got ranked pretty high on this list, Christian Haynes. He gave Christian Haynes some problems this week. Devondre Sweat, he, just absolute monster in 1v1s. And I think kind of like when I'm going to get into talking about Christian Haynes, we talking about developing that nasty culture in the trenches.
Yep.
This is a guy who brings that, he's not Christian Wilkins. He's not going to be your buddy after this guy is going to be mean and let you know he don't like you in the trenches. 6'4", 360 pounds, Neal. He is the definition of a pocket disruptor for me. He's what the Cowboys and all of us wanted Mazi Smith to be. That's what he is.
Right. And look at the trend here in the first 4 players that we've put up, or the first, each of our first 2 rounds, physical trench play.
Yeah.
Like that is where the Dolphins need to focus, is building a bully in the trenches. They have all the speed. They have the razzle dazzle. They need to get some of that meat and potatoes on those in the trenches. Like that's where I want to see this team focus.
All right, so go up next at number 3. You have a guy that I have at number 5, Peyton Wilson.
Yeah, you take injuries out of the equation, and I think he's a borderline first-round pick. He actually reminds me a little bit of a blend between Jack Campbell, who we liked last year, and Logan Wilson, who plays for the Bengals. He's a heady football player, tackling machine. He can cover. He actually, forces turnovers. He's battled some injuries at NC State. I think he's probably a 3rd or 4th round type of player because of the medicals. But if he's a guy that can stay healthy, he's a guy who could be in the running for Defensive Player of the Year in the right scenario. So I would love a player with him. He's a tremendous leader too, great football instincts, just a smart, heady player that you would love to have in the middle of your defense. And to our point earlier, man, I'd love to accumulate a couple more picks, day 2 picks, just so that we can take a waiver on a guy like this. Even if we don't, say we keep Baker and David Long, we learned this year you can never have too many guys in the interior, and those guys get banged up. So I'm a big fan of Peyton Wilson, and he's a dude that I would love to see in the aqua and orange.
Now, with Peyton Wilson, to me, this week he was clearly the fastest linebacker in Mobile. And you mentioned something, and he displayed it all week. He was good in coverage this week.
Really good.
And he's the type of guy who can make a stop at the line of scrimmage, or he can rush the passer. It really stood out to me that in 1-versus-1 drills this week, meant to highlight wide receivers, how good he was in coverage. I thought he was the best linebacker this week at the Senior Bowl. So number 3 for me, though, again, kind of like, Fuaga. He was probably not going to be there. Obviously, he's the number 1 edge on a lot of boards. Latu from UCLA. Hey, Jalen Phillips. I thought this week, you saw his explosive active hands again, like Sweat, disruptive all week. He had a battle with Fuaga this week. He was stymied a few times, but he also beat him for a would-be sack with a nice cross shot move. 6'5", 265 pounds. I mean, this kid's a stud, man. Obviously, he's not going to probably be there. Not probably, he won't be there. But based off, we don't have Andrew Van Ginkel under contract and Cameron Good and Jalen Phillips. That's a need with everyone that's hurt. And, when you look at his performance, he was arguably the best defensive performer this week. He's just not going to be there. I already know that, but I'm going by how I graded this by need and standout this week. And Latu was a beast this week. He's just not going to be there.
Yeah, look, he was the most productive pass rusher in college football this year. That's the truth. I mean, he's a good football player. Pass rushers tend to go a little higher. Look, the Dolphins need to figure out something at the edge because they have 2 players coming back from significant injuries. I think that for me is actually one of the number 1 reasons that I think I have to figure a way to move on for Christian Wilkins, because now I have another team need that popped up that I didn't have on my Christmas list before this, right? So I think the Dolphins need to look at edge, but yeah, Latu's a good player. I could see him going as high as 8 to Atlanta. His floor, I mean, God, if he made it to the range of where the Dolphins are, if you're operating on a best player approach, it's a pick that would make a lot of sense. I'll just put that out there. It's a pick that it would probably, a lot of people would be like, holy hell, why are we taking an edge? But it's a pick that I personally be like, hell yeah, that's a dude that, could get after the quarterback, but he's a hell of a football player, man. Like, Denver, I think, is a really good fit for him early at like pick number 12.
At number 4, you got Zach Frazier.
Yeah, look, a lot of the things I said about Jackson Powers Johnson holds true here, just not at that level. Like, he's a strong, tough guy, battle tested in the interior, plays with a nasty streak, kind of kick you in the face while you're down type of player, which, if it doesn't get me 15-yard penalties, I love a little bit of that added aggression to this team. But, I think he's a guy at the bottom of the second round. If those top 2 centers are gone, that makes a lot of sense. I know Daniel Jeremiah from the NFL Network is the big fan of Frazier. He's just a guy that, if you don't get those first 2 and you go a different route in round 1, because maybe somebody that you didn't expect falls into your lap, because the Dolphins are in that position in the draft, right, where getting outside the top 20, someone really good could fall right into their lap. Maybe if you don't go interior offensive line, then a guy like Zach Frazier would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I have him as honorable mention. I mean, I think I said earlier he had a chance where he could have raised his stock this week,
right?
Obviously, because he wasn't able to be out there. He didn't. So, listen, with Zach Frazier, good player. I think, I think he's, I think the more you watch his tape, you fall in love with him.
Right.
That's what I found with him. I don't know about you. So,
yeah,
he's got that wrestling background too. And we know how that's worked out for former, so we know how it worked out the interior transition for former wrestlers at the next level. And it's been huge, right?
Yeah. I love that about interior offensive linemen, because when you wrestle at that level, there's a discipline, there's an endurance. I think it's probably one of the hardest sports when you're in high school and college to actually do. So, when you get a guy that has that type of background, you can't question his work ethic, his endurance and things like that. But Zach Frazier's a guy that should squarely be on the Dolphins' radar as a guy because, again, everything I said about Jackson Powers Johnson, he makes a lot of sense. He's a tough dude, and I just saw in the chat someone called him a dog. He's a guy that you consider a dog. He's a guy that's going to play to the damn whistle and maybe a little bit beyond it sometimes. I like that. I like that attitude that he brings.
Hold on a sec. All right, so number 4 for me, Tyler Guyton. I mean, look at the athleticism he displayed this week. He
looked awesome.
He was unbelievable, and his reps now, I think he has, the ability to convert to left tackle the same way a guy like Jedrick Willis did for Alabama. He looked real strong this week, Neal. He was on his game, that's for sure.
Yeah, he made himself a lot of money this week. I think he pushed himself to be the 4th offensive tackle in this draft battle with Amarius Mims from Georgia. He has outrageous physical tools, athleticism for days. He's a guy that's probably going to get drafted higher than most people anticipated to begin with anyway. But, I mean, he had a really good week, man. And, for those teams that draft off of traits, this is a guy that has tremendous upside. I really see teams like the Packers being a really good fit. The Rams could be a really good fit for him. I think he solidified himself as a round 1 player this week for sure.
I agree. And at number 5, you have a safety, and I don't even have a safety on my list, Neal.
A safety for my alma mater, and I don't go to every game, but I have season tickets. Go Terps. Bo Braid is a guy, when I watched the Terps, that stood out as the best player on this football team. There is a Tagovailoa on the football team, but the best player for when I look who's going to translate to the NFL was Bo Braid. Great straight line speed, willing and able tackler. He has ball playmaking and ball skills that we definitely need. I love his length out there. He's got that click and close ability. The Dolphins have a great start. One great starting safety in Javon Holland, and kind of a dark hole at the other side. Bo Braid might not be a day 1 NFL starter, but he is a guy that I think will develop into a quality NFL player. The Maryland Terps have done a tremendous job of getting defensive backs in the NFL. They're very well coached under Mike Loxley and his coaching staff. Bo Braid's an under-the-radar guy. He's probably a 4th round, 5th round type of pick, but a guy that I think brings tremendous upside to the table.
Again, at 5, I had Peyton Wilson. So, I mean, we're pretty much good there. At number 6, though, I had Christian Haynes out of UConn. Man, again, I think he was so nasty this week. He had a rep against Jefferson where it was nasty this week. He had a rep against Jefferson where the helmets came off. I think he shows a strong anchor and a mean streak. And he's the type of nasty lineman. Again, you want to change the culture of the trenches, right? And here was the rep I'm talking about from Haynes.
Jefferson from
Look at this. Look at this. Look at this. Look at this. Look at he frustrated Jefferson so bad that he took his helmet off. And look at he didn't react, bro. Walked away, picked up his helmet. That's one you want to see. That's some maturity. He stymied him so bad that the man was out here throwing his helmet. I thought Christian Haynes, interior wise, had a really strong week. And he just showed nastiness and he showed a good anchor. So a guy I like, but again, he's not a 1st round talent I'm talking about here, but I think he's a good player and I think he brings something to that interior. Again, kind of like what we were talking about with Tavondre Sweat, brings that nastiness to this culture we were looking for, right?
Yeah, I feel like every year there's an offensive lineman that's drafted in the third round that it's like, damn, why did my team not take him? And I think Christian Haynes has that type of aura about him, where I think he's a
Mm,
guy, that could be a 10-year starter here. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Damian Lewis, who's a free agent from Seattle,
yeah,
who came from the
he
U.
went to
Uh,
LSU.
yeah, LSU. You're right, LSU. Yeah, he's a guy that became I think he was a third or fourth round pick, developed into a really good football player, and Christian Haynes is a guy that I know that in NFL circles he's loved more than he is in kind of draft Twitter world. So he's a good player, and that's a good guy to have on your board.
So at 6, you have a guy who I have on my list at 9, tight end Jaheim Bell from FSU, sir.
Yeah, it's funny because I know we've been talking about getting the complete tight end, and Jaheim Bell's probably not that. He's not a great blocker. He's an adequate blocker. He's a guy who can threaten the vertical seam, who has tremendous ball skills, catches the ball cleanly, catches with his hands. He's a mismatch nightmare for opposing linebackers. He has great speed. He kind of reminds me of a thinner Darren Waller, who can put on
Mm.
some weight and be, probably be, develop into more of an NFL body. But like, he's not going to be anything that we really want in the run game. But he tracks the ball well, he catches the ball well, and he's a mismatch nightmare for defenses. So a Jaheim Bell, probably late third, early fourth round type of player. Um, he's my fourth favorite tight end in the draft completely. I have one that I'm going to talk about in a couple spots from here. That's my favorite for the Dolphins. But Jaheim Bell, to me, man, would be a hell of a add to this roster if the Dolphins find a way to acquire a pick in the third and fourth round.
Yeah, one of the most impressive things I thought this week was him just showing his, ability to fight through contact off of his release. He can obviously separate, offers you a bit of a red zone threat, has solid hands. You see how fluid he moves and how quickly, and sometimes you forget he's a tight end, but then you see that he's 6'1", and you remember, that's probably his biggest downfall is his height.
Right.
Will he be reverted to in the new style if he's in our offense in more of an H-back role? I don't know. Is he more suited to if you want to run more 12 personnel than 11 personnel, right? Have 2 tight end threats out of there, maybe. So I like Jaheim Bell. I like, I got him number 9 on my list here. So number 7, you've got a guy that I've got at number 10, Ladd McConkey, wide receiver out of Georgia. Seemed this week like he caught everything thrown his way at Mobile. Great hands, can separate well. Seems like the ideal slot guy in McDaniel's offense. Showed off a great line of scrimmage release package this week too. 6 foot, 185 pounds. And I got some reps from him. Don't worry, people. We got some skill position reps. Your thoughts on the guy you have at number 7?
Yeah, he's the best route runner in this draft class. He's a guy that if you watch Georgia football, he always stood out. You're going to get a lot of Cooper Cup comparisons for the obvious reason. He actually reminds me a little bit more of a guy like Golden Tate who played for Seattle. He's a smooth operator in space, gets open, has great hands. He's just so fluid in and out of his breaks. Just a guy that, I think he's so perfect for what the Dolphins do. And I will say this, we do these mock drafts when we do them, and we do them a lot off of team needs, right? And I do think the Dolphins will go offensive line in some capacity in round 1. In round 2, I do think there's a strong possibility they surprise people and go wide receiver. And 2 names that I think that you can keep an eye on are Ladd McConkey and then someone that I saw Alf mention in our space earlier, Malachi Corley. I think those are 2 dudes that the Miami Dolphins could be all.
What's your take on Malachi as well?
He's a stud, man. He's an absolute stud. He's definitely a top 64 pick in this draft. They're just both such good football players. And like I'll hear Dolphins fans tell me I'm a fool because wide receiver is not in need, but a wide receiver group isn't 2 players. So I would say that if you don't think the Dolphins could potentially go receiver in the second round, you haven't been paying attention because they took a corner when they had Xavier Howard and Jalen Ramsey and Kader Gohu. Like, keep an eye on some of these receivers because I think Mike McDaniel wants to complete that wide receiver core. They tried every which way, free agency, trades, and it just didn't work out. Keep an eye on some of these players because this is a special wide receiver group.
Yeah, it is. And a guy that I have here on the next one, because we already went over Sweat, is I thought Roman Wilson had a big time week. He shut it down. Another guy who shut it down today, didn't have anything else to show or prove. Speed. When you talk about a guy who fits McDaniels, speed with Roman Wilson, crazy vertical threat. He was cooking this week. Another player who, again, like I said, shut it down this week, showed off his hands. He had a nice one-handed grab this week. I don't know if you saw that. Showed how well he can stem his routes, separates well. He just seems like a guy McDaniel would love.
Right.
That's what was screaming out to me. And here's some of his skill position, highlights. But what are your thoughts on Roman Wilson?
Yeah, again, another guy who's a good, smooth operator, great route runner, consistent hands. He's a guy that's going to be there probably third or fourth round. Well coached, right? Comes out of Michigan, Jim Harbaugh offense. Look, he's a guy that teams in the third round that are looking to get a good complementary wide receiver. A team maybe like the Baltimore Ravens that have Zay Flowers and are looking for a guy that has a good alternate skill set to him. He's a really good football player, man. You watch Michigan, the national champs this year. I mean, he was the best receiver on the football field for them. So I think he's a guy that, he's only made himself money this week in a deep wide receiver class. He's a guy that could potentially fall to a team's lap way later than he should go just because of the depth of this draft. I mean, it's a special wide receiver draft. So that's where, if you're a team and you're looking for a third option in that offense, there's a laundry list of players that can help you out.
So round out your 8, 9, and 10. You had Jared Wiley, Cedric Gray, Austin Booker.
Right.
Jared Wiley just missed. He was I did 5 honorable mentions. He was 6. Cedric Gray was my 4th honorable mention. And we'll get into the honorable mentions after you go through this. But yeah, Jared Wiley, Cedric Gray, and Austin Booker as well.
Yeah, so I'll start with Jared Wiley. Jared Wiley literally, and it's high praise, reminds me a lot of Travis Kelce. I think he's the complete package of tight end. He's a guy that I think is going to be an NFL Pro Bowl caliber tight end. He's special with the ball in his hands, got good hands. He's a good inline blocker, gets to the second level. Well, he had 8 touchdowns last year, good red zone threat for TCU. He's a guy that just has the makings to be that guy who someone drafts in the 4th and 5th round and just becomes a hell of a football player. Cedric Gray is a rangy linebacker from North Carolina, physical, gets off blocks really, really well, very productive football player. You could tell by how he plays the game that he just is one of those passionate dudes that loves what he's doing. He's got a good build. He could probably pack on 5 more pounds or 10 more pounds, hopefully, and keep that speed. But rangy linebacker, great sideline to side and speed, tracks the ball well. Good technician in terms of tackling. And then Austin Booker, amazing get off the line. He's a guy, 3rd round type of player probably, but with our injuries, I could see him being a really good fit for what we do as a rotational pass rusher. Unbelievable get off, great first step, uses his hands well, can get around tackles. Just a really good football player who made himself a lot of money this week.
Yep. And then our honorable mentions. For me, I had Zach Frazier, like I mentioned earlier. I had to put Quinyon Mitchell up there. He's the best DB this week. And who do we have behind Cam Smith, Cater, and Jalen? We ain't got much. I thought Darius Robinson out of Missouri, the defensive lineman, had a very strong week. I got Cedric Gray as well. And now, guys who didn't make this list, Jared Wiley, Jarvis Brownlee Jr. had a huge week.
Great day.
But wide receiver wise, Ricky Parasol didn't make it, but he had a great week. But a reason why I got a guy like Xavier Leggett on here is he reminds me of Debo. He fits the Debo role. I don't know. It just screams Debo to me when I look at him. And we know, Eric is a comma being drafted by this staff. And, listen, I just think they would. That's enough. I think there's I saw 4 or 5 guys receiver wise this week that McDaniel and them would like as
Of
as
course.
picks if they could accumulate some more draft picks here for sure.
Of course, they're going to get a receiver at this draft at some point. There's no doubt in my mind they're going to get a receiver, and they might trade up to get one in the third round or something like that. My list: Javon Bullard is a guy from Georgia who's played corner and safety. I love his versatility. I think he's actually one of the most underrated safeties. I view him as my safety 3 in this year's draft class. When I've watched Georgia's defense, you always expect great play in the trenches, great linebacker play, but he really stood out in their secondary for me. Brandon Coleman was a guy that has played interior and on the tackle position for TCU. Big, strong cat, a guy that I view him more as a spot starter depth piece. There's Cole Bishop from Utah, heady football player, smart, another safety. You see, I really think we need a safety if you see what I'm doing.
Well, yeah, we do. Yeah.
And the two other guys are guys that had really bad weeks so far, and one of them is Kingsley Suamatia from BYU. He didn't have a great week, but I think he's a good football player, and I actually think he's a better interior guard than tackle. I think he's a guy that can kick inside and be a people mover. And then Joe Milton, and Milton has a rocket arm. I love his athleticism. I like to take a quarterback in the later rounds that have traits. Maybe with one of those 6-round picks, he's a guy that the Dolphins could pick and try to develop, because I am a big, big fan of this team. Look, I have them moving off of Mike White and going with Skylar Thompson. And I think the Dolphins need to find a quarterback that can make plays off script in the disaster that happens. If there was something that happened to Tua, we need someone that can kind of come in there and play some off script football. So I like Joe Milton. Really, I put him on there really for the Miami Dolphins, because I think he's a guy that I have circled and starred as a late round pick that I would love to see the Dolphins get in house.
And it was a rough week for all the quarterbacks this week. Bo Nix was not good this week. So
yeah, he hurt himself a lot, Bo Nix. There was people that had him going like 12 to Denver, and I don't see any way in hell you don't spend a first round pick on him. No chance.
All right, so we got a couple things to quickly get through because Neal's got to get out of here. So I'll get through the few quick talking points that we really don't need to cover. But in case you guys didn't know, Tyreek Hill today was named the Sporting News 2023 Offensive Player of the Year. Shout out to him. And
well
then
deserved.
Tua Tagovailoa was named 2023 Comeback Player of the Year. No Damar Hamlin love at all. So, hey, when you look at comeback player coming off the concussions, everyone said his career was done, and here we are. Ready for some flag football this weekend, bro?
No, I'm not watching. I'm not watching.
Are you going to watch the skills contest or no?
Maybe. I'll watch it.
Tua's doing the precision, and then
I'm not watching dodgeball.
Tyreek's in the dodgeball.
I'm not watching dodgeball. I'll watch the precision passing.
Why are you hating on dodgeball, bro? One of the greatest movies ever.
I hate the freaking Pro Bowl weekend,
Duck,
man.
dodge, weave.
I can't stand it, man. I really can't.
Well, it used to be something back in the day, but anyways.
Yeah, man. But no, man. I'll tell you, man. That's good for Tua because, look, Tua's been through a lot. He's a bona fide NFL starting quarterback at this point. They're not just throwing any Joe Schmo out there. And Tua's a good sport, and he's a likable guy. And I think that's why a lot of us care so much about his success, is because just Tua does everything the right way. The way he approaches everything is the right way.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that in the next couple weeks, Tua's going to have a lot more money in his bank account than he does right now. I'll just say that.
Yeah. All right, guys, smash the like button, subscribe if you're new. I'll probably be back tomorrow. We'll be back on Saturday for Dolphins After Dark. Until the next one, fins up all day, every day. Until Margaritaville comes after us.